Nicholas Butler. Hey, man, thank you so much for joining me on Walking Inside Poems.
Thanks for having me on, John. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So you chose a James Galvin poem. Looking forward to talking about that. Before we do so, yeah, right on, right on. You're a guest on my other podcast, so if people watch both of them, they will have already seen you and heard a little bit about you. But for those who are only watching this podcast, give people just a quick summary of who you are.
Sure. My name is Nicholas Butler. I'm a 45-year-old writer based in West Central Wisconsin. I've written 6 books, 5 novels, and 1 collection of short stories. I write poetry and nonfiction too, and married, and I've got 2 kids and a big lazy dog who's taking a nap not too far away from me right now.
Right on. And you're up in Wisconsin where it's pretty cold, but not too bad right now.
Yeah, it's actually semi-tropical right now. Probably uh, the mercury is going to be dancing with 30, 35 today. So
Nice. Well, we want to get into Galvin, but let me ask you, especially since you are a poet as well as a fiction writer and an essayist, who are some of the other poets who you've read and loved over the years?
oh gosh. Well, my wife and I were just talking about Gerard Manley Hopkins. I can't think of another poet that has his particular rhythm. But Dick Allen, Jim Harrison, um, Wendell Berry, um,
How about Gary Snyder?
Gary Schneider, yeah.
Yeah.
Galvin has always occupied kind of an outsized portion of my of what I consume, not just prose but poetry. There's something about Galvin's brain and images that he comes back to, and just a certain grittiness that I don't know what to say. Like he just there's for different people, there's those poets that just speak right to you.
Yes.
It's not, you can buy a collection and it's not like there's 1 or 2 good poems in that collection. If you're their fan, you read each new book in its entirety, and that's how I feel about
Yeah.
Galvin.
Right on, man. Well, hey, let me read the poem and then let's talk about it a little bit. Uh, I will put the text of this poem in the show notes for folks, but yeah, it's called Heaven is a Heavy House, Axe, Draw Knife, Auger, Crosscut Saw. You fell the trees, you limb them, peel them, and skid them out. You raise a heavy house with heavy rooms, a heavy loft. A heavy wet snow falls in May, snows you in for 5 days. That snow makes new grass heavy, and heavy with flowers. There is a heaven, and you are alone in it, not even a voice to talk to yourself in. Just swerving memories of hope and fear, so lethally ephemeral, a girl playing guitar and horses in the yard. You wait for the horse that comes to your gate with a bullet hole in its forehead. He doesn't want anything. He stares at you, then wheels and gallops away, leaving you in the heavy house you made from life, a heavy, wet snow. It's like the floor of the sky fell out. Woo!
Had
Really,
you read this one before?
I had not, man. Really strong stuff, for sure. I was, vaguely aware of Galvin, and I knew he was married to Jory Graham at one time. And I've asked this before. I guess you didn't study too much with him at Iowa, but you knew him at the Iowa Writers Workshop. Yeah.
Correct, yeah. Because I was studying fiction there, I never would have had him for a workshop, but he taught a class on James Merrill, and I took that, and then he taught a class on Moby Dick, and I took that. And also, you know, probably was about as fanboyish with him as any faculty member. Like I was very fanboyish around him. I just felt like I had this 2-year period of time to be in communion with these intelligences that I had always admired, and so I just any chance I had to talk to him, I took it, and I would say also that his book, The Meadow, is perfect. It's not almost perfect or kind of perfect. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. So he's one of these sneaky talents where if he wants to write a novel
Yeah.
and make it stunning, he can. And if he wants to write a great poem, he can.
And let's see, he was born in 1951, so that would make him, I believe, 73 years old now. And I think he does still teach at Iowa.
He's
Uh,
retired, I think, as of like maybe a year or two ago, not long ago, but yeah.
and he lives in the Big West. He lives in Wyoming, if I'm not mistaken. And,
Yep.
and then that sort of Western landscape definitely makes its way into his writing a lot. I'm guessing that's one of the things. You're Wisconsin, not Wyoming, but I know that you're not a big city guy, and I think you admire that aspect of his writing as well, I'm guessing.
I do, yeah. It's not to say that I don't care for big cities because I love big
Sure.
cities. I just don't care to live in one. But
Right.
but yeah, like again, when we come back to I don't read poetry for images, but if the rhythm of a poem is right and that writer is engaging images and words that are meaningful to me, all then it's all the better. And you know, I live in a place where a lot of people have horses. I like to see horses on the landscape.
Yeah.
For people that love horses, it's um, it's a relationship that's kind of different than anything else,
Yeah.
right? It's even different than having a dog that's beloved to you. Um, People that love horses love them on this different level, and I'm not a horse owner, but I respect that.
Yeah.
And horses are often in his poems, especially his earlier stuff, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you don't like cities, but
No,
I
no,
know
no, you're fine.
in our
You're fine.
last conversation you mentioned chopping wood, and I suspect a lot of people who live in the city have never chopped wood in their life, for example, and that's something that I can picture James Galvin doing and yourself as well. So
Yeah.
that was all I meant by that. But so you said you don't read poems for images. I don't know how fair this question is, but why do you read poems then?
I read poems to see how poets are energizing language and economizing language and creating larger emotions than what really should be just on the page. Okay. Um, I also read them because um, there's a there's a time in the day when I want to lay down in bed and read a novel and let that novel take me as far as it can until my eyes get heavy. And then there's times where I just want to, read something quickly, and poems are that for me. They're like the macchiato rather than the pot of coffee. Um, yeah, why do you read poetry?
You know, I sort of buy into the cliche that poetry is trying to say with language what we normally can't say with language. It uh, I've been inspired by poetry since I was a child, and there's just something about the that little, as you say, almost like a little snapshot. A haiku, for example, just what you can do in just that short period of time is amazing. Uh, and yeah, just that appreciation. I've always been a language person. That appreciation of language and of just that little spotlight, that little moment, of some experience or or some feeling or some emotion or whatever is with a good poet is captured in such a beautiful way. And I don't know, man. I liken it to songs. It is different as a songwriter and as someone who writes poetry. It is different than songs, but it's got a lot of that same power, I think, of kind of a universe in 2 minutes that
Hmm.
appeals to me. Um, yeah, yeah. What do you think? What do you make of that cliche line though that poetry is trying to do with language what normally we can't do with language? Do you buy that, or do you think about that?
Hmm. Um, I tend to think about, I'm going to answer your question by not quite answering it. One of my best childhood friends, Nicholas Gulig, is just retired from being the poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin, and he insists that the human condition is that we're never quite communicating what we want to communicate to other human beings. We're falling just short of what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I think the best poems, maybe this is coming back to your question. The best poems somehow do it right, somehow communicate something grander. I think any art can do that, but what I what I reject in poetry is just something that's pretty. I really respect when a poet tries to hit a home run.
Yeah.
Like the end of this poem feels like the ball cleared the fence.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. By the way, this is sort of a side note, but I have signed up for something called the Stafford Challenge. Are you familiar with what that is? The poet William Stafford. It's based in his work, but the challenge is write a poem every day for 1 year. So
Okay.
at the end of the year, you have 365 poems. Uh, I'm about a week in,
Yeah.
and it's been great so far, but it's daunting as hell. I'm thinking, there's going to be those days where
Right.
I'm going, oh shit. But I have a feeling too that maybe those days will yield some of the better poems when I really, because I've been a guy who doesn't have a lot of discipline in my writing. And by the way, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you on the other podcast about your novels. What kind of discipline you have in terms of your writing? I've been more, even with my songwriting, I just haven't ever been a guy who just sits down and said, okay, I'm going to write a song today and sit here until it comes. It's more I wait for that inspiration. Um, but yeah, anyway, do you have a strong discipline with your writing?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you.
No. No,
Good.
I don't. I don't. I I think there's something magical about making art, and it's just my process. I don't look down at other people's processes, or it's just we're all different human beings, and we work differently. But for me, the notion that I have to write 2 pages or whatever it is on any given day feels kind of like very Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
like we gotta do this thing. We gotta, if you're not doing this, you're not doing it. And I'm kind of like, well, I think about it the same way as somebody who writes a daily column for a newspaper. Like, I don't know that we always have something to say. And I think that's okay.
Right.
I think like the project that you're endeavoring to do, the reason why I like that is that I think even if you don't feel like you've written a great poem today, I bet there's some parts that
Oh
you
yeah.
can you can use
Right.
down the line, which is cool, and I
Right.
think there's something to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can see that already that I'm not going to have 365 good poems, but I might get 20 or 30 out of that. And to some extent, that's farming different lines at different moments. Anyway, let's get back to Galvin in this poem. Man, right off the bat, I love the alliteration in the title. Heaven is a heavy house. Um, I'm not too sure about that kind of subtitle. I kind of for some reason I wanted him to just call it Heaven is a Heavy House. Uh, but So one of the things that does for me right off the bat is it has sort of a counter vibe to what we normally think of when we hear the word heaven. We don't, I think we tend to associate heaven with lightness and something airy, and it's heaven. And it's like, no, it's heavy. It's heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What, what do you think about the title? Anything other than that?
Well, I'm kind of glad you brought up the subtitle thing. If Galvin was here, maybe I'm now at a level in my writing where I could say, "Hey, man, what the hell's up with the subtitle?
Yeah.
Walk me through that."
Yeah.
Because no doubt he had a reason for it there. But Heaven is a heavy house is a great title.
Right.
And then I feel like you take a little step down. But
Well,
maybe he knew that too. Maybe he knew he had a great title and he wanted to do something playful. I don't know.
I just realized I hadn't thought about this. It just hit me. I think what he's doing there, "Heaven is a Heavy House" is a great title, but it is somewhat abstract. And now let's get something concrete.
Yeah.
Axe, drawn, auger, crosscut. It's like this is grounded. This isn't just
Right.
fantasy world here. This is also grounded in that real life thing. So you fell the trees. That word has always intrigued me. The way we use that word "fell," you fell the trees. It's such a odd use of that word. I mean, we normally hear the word "fell" and we think of past tense. Something fell, but you fell it. Using
Right.
it as a verb like that is really interesting.
It is, and I didn't notice it until this is really cool to be able to have a conversation with you in real time about a poem, I have to say. And I never noticed that there's a uh what do you call it? There's a symmetry between the first line and the last line because you have fell coming at the end of the poem too, which I think,
Right. Yeah.
I think sometimes writers we do things accidentally and sometimes we do things intentionally, and I wonder how intentional that was.
Well, for a guy like him, I'm guessing it was intentional. I mean, that's probably one difference between a poem and a short story or a novel or an essay is that typically, I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, I had an episode on Frank Stanford, and he has an epic poem that's something like 15,000 lines long. But most poems are nice, tight little things where every word, every word. The poet thought about every single word in a way that you probably do too when you're writing novels, but not to the extent that you do when you're writing a poem, right? So
Galvin said something funny one time about novel writing in one of our classes. He's like, novels are great because you can hide a lot of shit in them.
yeah, yeah, you can't hide in a poem.
No.
It's all good right there. Okay, so you limn them again. Interesting verb. A limb is a noun, but you limb them and peel them and skid them out. Okay, so it's a concrete sort of manual labor world we've entered where you're out in the wilderness or someplace outside, you're cutting down trees, you're also peeling them and skidding them. You're going to build this house, right? And I think that's probably both meant to be literal and figurative in some way as well. You raise a heavy house, and another interesting word, raise.
Yeah.
Um, isn't there a different spelling when you raise something? You tear it down too, right?
Yeah. RAZE, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you raise a heavy house with heavy rooms, a heavy loft, a heavy wet snow. I mean, there's four lines in a row with the word heavy in it.
Yeah.
We're getting into a heavy world for sure. You raise a heavy house with heavy rooms, a heavy loft, a heavy wet snow falls in May, snows you in for 5 days. Not the only moment I think of an obvious rhyme there, May and days. And there's fell again. You fell the trees and the snow falls.
Yeah.
Just jump in anytime. I'll just kind of
Yeah. Well,
move.
and I don't, for me, it's always difficult too, because this is a person that I know, and I know a little bit of his biography, but in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking of, you know, I I I I think it's not like classified information or anything like that. I think after Galvin, in the early days of Galvin's career, he bought this land in Wyoming, and he built his house. He actually built his house. Um,
Yeah.
so it's not just for me as I read this poem, I guess I could just take it for what it is on the paper, but I also am imagining him
Yeah.
recollecting the construction of that house, all his dreams about the future, his intentions for building that house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that also gets back to the way that the title is both that sort of abstraction of heaven as a heavy house and also that concrete real life. No, I really built the house kind of thing. That's cool.
Yeah.
That snow makes the new grass heavy. Again, heavy. I haven't counted how many times we have the word heavy in here, but it's a lot. Um, and heavy with flowers. That's a line that I keep kind of tripping on. I'm not sure I understand. Not that I need to understand it in a literal way, but it does always kind of intrigue me when I read this poem. The snow makes new grass heavy, and heavy with flowers. Does that do anything for you? Do anything?
I don't know. I just, man, I love that line. I mean, sometimes I don't know if you have to have you don't have to have a logical answer for things, but
No.
I just imagine he's got this later in the poem, horses enter the scene,
Hmm.
and like if you know anything about buying hay for horses, like the high country hay is considered really valuable. And so I just imagine like this, he's looking at the world a little bit through the perspective of potentially like a horseman, like
Yeah.
he's thinking about the grass that's going to be made and the things that live in the grass, like flowers.
Nice. Yeah.
um I
Okay.
love the idea that flowers can be heavy, you know?
Uh-huh. Both literally and kind of a heavy, conceptually maybe. Um, yeah. And man, the H's in this poem. You mentioned horses, hay. Uh, I'm sure there's others, but there's lots of really, really fascinating just the language by itself without even thinking about meaning. Now we come to there is a heaven. There is a heaven, and that enjambment there, I think, is significant. There is a heaven, and you are alone in it. Um, that almost declarative there is a heaven
Yeah.
is intriguing for sure.
Yes, and also that you're somehow sentenced to being in heaven by yourself. Like
Uh-huh.
it
Uh-huh.
the kind of poem, turns there pretty heavily, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
Like we have this kind of like the promise of building this new house, and then springtime coming, and then it's like there is a heaven, and
Yeah.
you are sentenced to just be wandering around in heaven without even the ability to make a noise.
Interesting. I didn't read it that way. I didn't read it as a negative thing with not even a voice to talk to yourself in. And this may be kind of my Buddhist um, uh, leanings, but I see that as almost like the self disappearing, where you there's not even a voice, you're not even talking to yourself. One of the problems we have with abstract, with the fact that we have the capability of abstraction, unlike horses and dogs, is we can talk to ourselves and think about the future and obsess about the past. There's this heaven where all that ends. I'm just in the moment. I'm here now. That's the way I read it. I
Yeah,
read that as a positive, not even a voice to talk to yourself in. Uh, that monkey mind disappears. It's
yeah,
gone, and you're just there in it. with swerving memories. I love that image there, the memories swerving of hope and fear. And wow, so lethally ephemeral. Holy crap.
Yeah. Lethally ephemeral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
then
don't know. I think I don't know. I never know whether I think one thing is a fiction writer who's never schooled really in poetry other than
though you do write poetry.
yeah, but I never studied it. I never studied how to write it. And
Yeah.
frankly, other than Galvin's class, I don't know how many classes I really took in poetry, but so I never feel like I'm a like accredited to talk about it really.
I'm not either. It doesn't
But
matter.
I but I feel like when he mentions heaven, like you're reading it in a positive way, which I like, and I'm pleased to like have the opportunity to talk about. But then I find that the coming lines, the so lethally ephemeral,
Mhm.
and then the next part where this horse enters the scene, it's that I mean that is dark, right? Right?
Not necessarily. I mean,
No, tell me
yes,
about it.
at
Lift
first
me up, man.
at first glance, yes, but okay. So lethally ephemeral. I mean, these are memories, and
Yeah.
so they're fleeting. They're fleeting, and I'm not sure why they're lethally ephemeral. Maybe other than the fact that we put so much hope and stock in those memories, but they're gone. They're um, they're ephemeral. But then he's talking about specific memories here. A girl playing guitar is a memory, an image he has in his mind. And horses in the yard. You wait for the horse that comes to your gate with a bullet hole in its forehead. And do you see that as a negative because of the bullet hole?
I think at this point in the poem, I start to feel like he's or you in the poem are stuck in heaven with some of your worst memories.
Ah, why would a girl playing guitar be a bad memory?
Well, what if you wanted her, but she didn't want
Oh,
you?
oh,
I
yeah.
don't know.
Maybe it's your ex.
I don't know. Yeah.
And horses in the yard is definitely not a bad memory for him. I mean,
No, I think you're right. I think
he's
you're
a
right.
horse guy.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing for me on the bullet hole.
Yeah.
For some reason, I instantly read that not as a literal. I think it could go two ways. It could be a dream, or just you know a fantasy kind of thing. But I read it as a marking. This horse has a little. Maybe it's a black or a brown horse that's just got a little
Yeah.
circular white thing that
Yeah.
looks like a bullet hole.
Oh, well, that's lovely. I love that. Yeah. No, I do. I do. That's great.
Yeah. I also, by the way, are you familiar? You've got to be familiar with James Wright, being a guy from the North Country, and his poem, "A Blessing." Do you know that poem?
No, but I'll go look it up when we're done with this.
It's a poem about. It may actually be I guess it's Minnesota, not Wisconsin, but he and a friend are driving, and they see two horses, and they stop and walk over to the fence, and the horses approach them, and it's got an amazing ending, by the way. I'm not going to give it away. I'll just have you read. It's called "A Blessing," sometimes called "The Blessing." I haven't figured out why it has two alternative titles. It's the same poem, but
Okay.
it's James Wright, and those horses want his affection. They come over and they ripple with pleasure at being petted and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't think Galvin is consciously making reference to Wright here, but a horse that comes to the gate and this interaction with the human instantly makes me, because I guess Wright's important to me. Think about that moment. And unlike Wright's horse, this horse doesn't want anything. It comes to the gate, but it doesn't want anything from you. In fact, he stares at you, then wheels and gallops away,
Yeah.
leaving you in the heavy house you made from life. So, yeah, that could be a little dark, I guess, because again, unlike James Wright's horses, who connect him to the real world and have this beautiful, tender moment that he interacts with them. This is nature just staring at you and saying, "I don't need anything from you. I don't want anything from you." And in fact, I wheel and I gallop away, leaving you in the heavy house you made from life.
Yeah.
A
And I
heavy,
just,
yeah, please.
well, I love the ending. I always, um, there's a bit in When Harry Met Sally where Harry always like reads the beginning of a novel and then flips ahead to the end of the novel and to decide whether he's going to read everything in between.
Yeah, yeah.
And
As a
so
novelist, you must hate that idea, but
well, I just love that movie, so I feel neither love nor hate for it. But what it reminds me of is that when I buy a new poetry collection, I always go to the last poem in the collection to see how they're going to end their collection.
interesting.
Um, and even so, reading the final poem, but then with special attention to the last lines of their last poem, I feel like that's where you make your case. For
Okay.
me as a reader, that's where I'm waiting for the poet to make their case, to like shut their closing arguments, and I want to see it done in an amazing way. And this isn't the final poem in this collection, but God, the way that this poem ends just is
So what do you make of that? The fact that we have this heavy house, we have this we're building or cutting trees, we're whatever heaven is here, we're stuck in there for better or for worse. We're having these memories, we have the interaction with the horse, and we have this heavy house we made from life. What a great line. In the heavy house you made from life, a heavy wet snow. It's like the floor of the sky fell out.
yeah.
So good.
I don't know. I've read this poem many times. And actually, I think it was first published on the New Yorker's website and Galvin read it. And I was sitting in my house on a snowy day and it was warm enough that the snow was falling off our steel roof really heavily. And I was watching it snow and I sent Galvin a message about how much I liked this poem. And it was one of those weird moments where he got back, like sometimes he doesn't always get back to me, but this time he got back to me within minutes. And um, I don't know why I share that except to just somehow I don't know. I would love to ask him where he got those last two lines. Like had he been carrying them around for a while? Is it one of those things where you're looking out your window and the ceiling of the sky is just that low on that particular day? I don't know. I would love to have him walk me through this.
Well, remember, it's a heavy, wet snow that snows you in for 5 days. So it's a big snow here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we need to make logical sense necessarily of it. But it's interesting that this is the first like he has in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like the floor of the sky fell out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for turning me on to this poem. It's a beautiful poem for sure. And
Well,
by the
and
way, I'd like you to read the poem for us. I'd like to hear it in your voice to take us out. But before you do that, I want to acknowledge another poem of his that you mentioned, Convenience Store, a very different poem. I'll
yeah,
read it
right.
real quickly just for folks that might be interested. It's really a very cinematic poem. I would bet a lot of money this was an actual experience that happened to him. Convenience store. After the wreck, I hunkered on the floor of the Casey store in Dexter, Iowa. I'd got my still scared dog, at least, from out of the cornfield where he'd run when we stopped rolling over. I'd lost my wallet and didn't know how long I'd have to wait for a friend to come 150 miles in such a storm. I wasn't bleeding noticeably anymore. In Carhartt coveralls, the locals came. They knew each other and talked about conditions as they stood in line with their pops and Copenhagen. Some glanced at my dog and me and must have wondered. A woman asked what I was doing there. She said she had a border collie herself. She had curly red hair under her baseball cap, an open 50-ish freckled, wind-burned face. I told her what had happened, and the worst was I couldn't have rented a motel room even if there was one in Dexter, Iowa, which there was not. She asked me if she could buy me something to eat. I said I was okay. She petted the dog and promised to call the store in 2 hours' time to make sure I wasn't there. She said she'd bring me home with her. This poem, if that's what it is for that woman who will never see these lines and doesn't have to know exactly who she is. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, what appealed to you about that poem, just real quickly?
Well, I think one thing that I love about that poem, especially at this time in American history, and this collection is, it wasn't published yesterday, or I think it was published a couple years back now. But what I love about this poem is that you've got this world-class poet. Galvin is a MacArthur fellow, teaches at the most prestigious school in the world, divides his time between Iowa, Wyoming, and his apartment in Rome or something like that, and he and this poem treat these people in Dexter, Iowa with gratitude, and he actually finds a way to celebrate, the simplicity of what's happening inside this gas station. And I feel like we're at this point in our history where, somebody in New York City could read a poem about people in Dexter, Iowa, and just be like, there's nothing there. Who
Yeah.
cares? Who cares about Dexter, Iowa? Who cares about the people that live there? They all voted this way, or they don't, they're not like me. And he's able to, it's almost feels like he wouldn't care for this if I said it, but it's almost like a parable,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. I'll tell you why I think you like the poem.
Okay.
This is a Nicholas Butler novel right here. This is very, very much in keeping with your stories. I think that appreciation of these people and that sweetness and that he brings to it, and I just love this line of, she doesn't have to see this poem. She knows exactly who she is. These are real people, man, and like you said, he has gratitude and appreciation for them, and yeah, that reminds me of your writing.
Well, thanks.
Nick, thank you so much for doing this. Will you take us out by love to hear Heaven is a Heavy House in your voice, if you don't mind.
Sure. Heaven is a heavy house, axe, draw knife, auger, crosscut saw. You fell the trees, you limb them, peel them, and skid them out. You raise a heavy house with heavy rooms, a heavy loft. A heavy wet snow falls in May, snows you in for 5 days. That snow makes new grass heavy and heavy with flowers. There is a heaven, and you are alone in it, not even a voice to talk to yourself in. Just swerving memories of hope and fear, so lethally ephemeral. A girl playing guitar and horses in the yard. You wait for the horse that comes to your gate with a bullet hole in his forehead. He doesn't want anything. He stares at you, then wheels and gallops away, leaving you in the heavy house you made from life, a heavy wet snow. It's like the floor of the sky fell out.
Yeah, we asked each other earlier why we read poems. That's why we read poems.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Nicholas Butler, thank you so much for doing this, man. I wish you all the best.
Hey, I hope our paths cross in real life someday. Thank you so much for having me on this
You
morning.
too. Thanks, man. Take care.
All right, take it easy.